The watering can slipped from Rose Whitmore's hand at exactly 3:47 on a Thursday afternoon in November, and the sound it made hitting the terracotta tile of her Upper West Side terrace was the sound of everything ending, not the sharp crack of breaking. The watering can didn't break. It was plastic cream-colored, bought from the hardware store on Columbus Avenue in 2003. And it had survived 17 years of weekly waterings without so much as a crack in the handle. It hit the tile and bounced once and rolled to a stop against the planter box, where the basil had finally died from the first frost, and water spread across the terracotta in a slow, dark stain that looked like a shadow growing. Rose stood with the phone pressed against her ear and watched the water spread and thought about shadows and how they only exist when there's light, and how when the light goes out, the shadow doesn't disappear. It just becomes everything. The voice on the phone belonged to a Virginia state trooper named Henderson or Harrison or something, with an H that Rose would never remember, because her brain had stopped processing new information the moment he said the words heart attack and your husband and I'm very sorry for your loss. Harrison was dead. Harrison Whitmore, 73 years old, had died alone on a dirt access road between Harper's Ferry and Charlottesville at 2:15 that afternoon, while Rose had been at the corner bakery buying sourdough bread and arguing with herself about whether to get the olive loaf or the plain, because Harrison preferred plain, but she liked olive, and after 47 years of marriage, a woman should be allowed to buy the bread she wanted. She had bought the plain. It was sitting on the kitchen counter right now, wrapped in brown paper, and Harrison would never eat it. The trooper was still talking. Something about a farmer on a motorcycle. Something about paramedics and 20 minutes and everything possible, but Rose wasn't listening anymore because she was doing math in her head. The kind of math that happens automatically when the world splits open. 2:15. He died at 2:15. She had been in the bakery at 2:15. She had been holding a loaf of bread and thinking about dinner. And Harrison had been dying. And she hadn't felt anything. No sudden pain in her chest. No inexplicable cold. No moment of knowing. She had been standing in a bakery on the Upper West Side thinking about olive loaf, and the man she had loved for 47 years had stopped existing, and the universe hadn't even bothered to tell her. Rose heard herself say thank you to the trooper. Heard herself ask about arrangements. Heard herself write down a phone number on the notepad by the kitchen phone in handwriting that looked almost normal, except for how the numbers tilted slightly to the right, like they were trying to run off the page. When she hung up the phone, she stood very still in the kitchen of the apartment she had lived in for 30 years and looked at the things that made up her life. The kitchen table oak with the corner where Nate had carved his initials when he was 7 and thought no one was looking. The bookshelf in the living room, floor-to-ceiling Harrison's forestry textbooks on the left, organized by subject. Her novels on the right, organized by author. The watercolor painting of Harper's Ferry above the sofa, bought from a street artist in 1972 when they were still dating. And Harrison had $3 in his wallet and spent all of it on that painting because Rose had stopped in front of it and said, "It looks like home." 47 years of accumulated existence. Furniture and books and paintings and the coffee maker that made exactly 4 cups. Because that's how much they drank every morning, 2 cups each. Sitting at the kitchen table not saying much. Because they had never been people who needed to fill silence with talking. And now it was just Rose, 73 years old. 73 years of being alive, and 47 of those years had been spent as half of something. And now she was whole again in the worst possible way. She walked to the living room and sat down in the armchair. Harrison's armchair, the one he always sat in to read after dinner. And she sat in it because it still smelled like him. Old Spice and sawdust, and something else she couldn't name, something that was just Harrison. And she sat there until the light coming through the windows turned from gold to gray to gone. The funeral was on a Thursday. Rose had always hated Thursday funerals. Something about Thursday felt wrong for death. Too close to the weekend. Too far from the mercy of Monday starting fresh. Thursday meant you had to go through Friday and Saturday and Sunday carrying it. And then Monday came and the world expected you to be functional again. But Harrison had died on a Thursday, so Thursday it was. The funeral home was on the Upper East Side, in one of those buildings that looked like it had been a mansion once before someone decided dead people were more profitable than living ones. High ceilings, crown molding, carpet so thick it absorbed sound. The kind of place where grief was expected to be quiet and well-dressed, and over by 5 o'clock so they could set up for the next family. Rose wore black because that's what you wore. A dress she had bought for someone else's funeral 3 years ago, and hadn't worn since. It still fit. That felt important somehow. That her body hadn't changed. That she could put on the same dress and zip it up the same way and look in the mirror and see the same woman, even though everything else had ended. Nate arrived first with his wife Vivian. Nate was 48 years old and looked like Harrison had looked at 48, tall and lean with hair going gray at the temples, in a way that made him look distinguished instead of old. He practiced law in Midtown Manhattan, corporate contracts, mergers and acquisitions, the kind of law that paid well enough for a house in Westchester, and private school for 2 boys and a wife who wore her sunglasses indoors. He hugged Rose at the door. A real hug, not the kind of hug where you barely touch. He smelled like expensive cologne and coffee. And underneath that, the faint chemical smell of dry cleaning, and Rose let him hold her for exactly as long as it took to feel like she might cry. And then she stepped back, because she had decided she wasn't gonna cry in public. "Mom," Nate said, and his voice was steady but his eyes were red. "I'm so sorry." Rose nodded because what else was there to say? Vivian stood 3 feet back, giving space, her sunglasses still on even though they were inside. She was 44 years old and pretty in the way that required effort and money. Blonde hair cut sharp at her shoulders. Lipstick the exact red of stop signs. She had never liked Rose, and Rose had never liked her. And they had both been perfectly civil about it for 15 years. "Mrs. Whitmore," Vivian said. And it was always Mrs. Whitmore, never Rose, never Mom. We're devastated. Rose nodded again. Garrett arrived 20 minutes later with his wife Judith and their 2 children, who were 12 and 9, and looked uncomfortable in suits that were probably bought specifically for this. Garrett was 45 and softer than Nate in every way. Softer face, softer voice, softer handshake. He worked in finance, doing something Rose had never fully understood, involving numbers and risk assessment and other people's money. He made more money than Nate, but spent more too. So it somehow came out the same. He didn't hug Rose. He shook her hand, formally, like she was a client. "Sorry for your loss," he said, and the words came out smooth and practiced, the kind of thing you said when you'd been to enough corporate funerals to have a script. Judith was better. She hugged Rose and whispered, "I'm so sorry," and meant it. And Rose felt grateful for that small mercy. The funeral itself was short. Rose had requested short. The funeral director had suggested a full-service eulogies, hymns, the works, and Rose had said no. Harrison wouldn't have wanted that. Harrison had been a man of few words who spent his life preferring trees to people. An hour in a room full of strangers talking about him would have been his personal hell. So they did 30 minutes. A Presbyterian minister who had never met Harrison read some generic words about eternal rest and peace beyond understanding. Nate stood up and said a few sentences about his father being a dedicated professional and a family man, sentences that sounded like they'd been written by someone who'd read Harrison's resume but never had a conversation with him. And then it was over. People filed past the casket. Rose stood next to it and shook hands and accepted condolences from people she barely knew. Colleagues from the Forest Service. A few neighbors from the building. The woman from the quilting group Rose had attended for 22 years, whose name was Barbara or Brenda and who cried more than Rose did. The only person who broke Rose's careful composure was Emmett Sullivan. Emmett was 62 years old with white hair and a face that had spent decades outdoors in all weather. He had been Harrison's supervisor at the Forest Service for 15 years, before retiring to a cabin in Vermont, where he built furniture and didn't talk to anyone for weeks at a time. He showed up in a suit that didn't fit right, too tight in the shoulders, and when he got to the casket, he stood there for a long time without moving. When he finally turned to Rose, his eyes were red and wet, and he didn't say anything. Just pulled her into a hug that smelled like wood smoke and squeezed her so hard she felt her ribs compress. "He was the best," Emmett said, and his voice cracked. "Best timberman I ever knew. Best friend, too." Rose felt something break loose in her chest, but she held it down because she had made a decision about crying in public, and she was going to stick to it. "Thank you for coming," she said. Emmett pulled back and looked at her hard. "You need anything at all, you call me." Rose nodded. "I mean it," Emmett said. "Harrison made me promise years ago. He made me promise if something happened to him, I'd look after you." Rose felt that crack in her chest widen. "When did he make you promise that?" Emmett looked uncomfortable. 2 years ago, maybe 3. We were out at a site in Virginia and he just said it out of nowhere. Made me swear. I thought it was strange at the time, but Harrison was always strange about some things. Strange how, like he knew something I didn't. Emmett shook his head. Anyway, I promised. So, if you need anything, you call. The reception was in the apartment because Rose couldn't afford to rent a hall and didn't want to anyway. The thought of Harrison's funeral reception at some anonymous catering venue with identical rooms labeled A and B made her feel sick. So people came to the apartment, 30 or 40 of them filling the living room and kitchen and spilling onto the terrace where the basil was still dead and the watering can was still lying on its side where Rose had never picked it up. There was food, too much food. People brought casseroles and lasagnas and platters of cold cuts and cookies and a spiral ham that someone had cooked with pineapple rings and maraschino cherries that looked obscene and festive at the same time. Rose stood in her own kitchen and watched strangers eat her food and drink her coffee and talk about Harrison in past tense. And she felt like she was watching it happen from very far away. Nate found her by the sink at one point, standing alone holding an empty plate. "You doing okay, Mom?" "Fine," Rose said, which was a lie, but the only acceptable answer. Nate looked at her like he wanted to say something else but didn't know what. They stood there in awkward silence for a moment, and then Vivian appeared and touched Nate's elbow and said something about needing to leave soon because the boys had school in the morning. And Nate nodded and turned back to Rose. "We'll come by this week," he said. "We need to talk about some things." "What things?" "Just paperwork, the will, estate stuff. Nothing urgent." But the way he said it made it sound urgent. Rose watched them leave. Watched Garrett and Judith leave. Watched everyone leave until it was just her and the apartment full of half-empty casserole dishes and the smell of too many people in one space. She stood in the middle of the living room and looked at the bookshelf. Harrison's books were still there exactly where he'd left them. Forestry management, silviculture, plant ecology. Thick textbooks with broken spines and pages marked with pressed leaves he'd collected on field trips and used as bookmarks. Rose walked over and pulled out one of the books at random. A Guide to North American Timber Species. Copyright 1987. She opened it, and a dried oak leaf fell out brown and brittle and crumbled into pieces when it hit the floor. She picked up the pieces carefully, cupped them in her palm, and stood there holding them like they were something precious. They were meeting in Nate's office in Midtown, because of course they were. Nate suggested it. Neutral ground, he said. More professional. Rose almost laughed. Professional. Like this was a business transaction, and not the dismantling of her entire life. The office was on the 34th floor of a glass tower near Grand Central. Floor-to-ceiling windows. View of the city spreading out in all directions like proof of human ambition, or hubris, depending on how you felt about cities. Rose had never liked heights. Never liked the feeling of being suspended in the air with nothing but glass between you and a long fall. Nate's secretary offered her coffee. Rose said no thank you and sat in one of the leather chairs across from Nate's desk. and waited. Garrett arrived 10 minutes late, apologizing about traffic, and sat in the chair next to Rose without looking at her. Nate had papers spread across his desk, official-looking documents with legal letterhead and highlighted sections and little sticky flags marking places to sign. "Okay," Nate said, shifting into lawyer mode, voice going smooth and neutral. "I know this is difficult, but we need to go through Dad's will and estate documents. I've reviewed everything and I think the distribution is pretty straightforward." He slid a document across the desk toward Rose. "This is the will. Dad updated it in 2016. Everything's been filed with the county probate court, and we're just waiting on some final paperwork, but the basic structure is clear." Rose looked at the document without picking it up. The words swam in front of her eyes. Whereas and heretofore and in sound mind. "The primary asset is this apartment," Nate continued. 2,400 square feet, Upper West Side, current market value, approximately $2.4 million. Dad's investment accounts total $170,000 after the market adjustment last year. And then there's the property in Virginia. Rose looked up. "Property? You didn't know about it?" "No." Nate and Garrett exchanged a look that Rose couldn't read. "Dad owned 30 acres in Augusta County, Virginia," Nate said. "Purchased in 1995. It's listed in the county land records under deed number 47222. It's designated as protected natural area, which means it can't be subdivided or developed." "I don't understand," Rose said. "Harrison bought land in Virginia and never told me." "Apparently." Nate's voice was carefully neutral. "The deed has only his name on it. You're not listed as co-owner." Rose felt something cold settle in her stomach. Why wouldn't he tell me? "I don't know, Mom. But according to the will, the distribution is as follows." Nate picked up another document, reading from it. "The apartment and the investment accounts go to myself and Garrett in equal shares. The Virginia property goes to you." Rose stared at him. "The apartment goes to you." "That's what the will says." "The apartment I've lived in for 30 years. Mom." Nate's voice went softer, almost apologetic. "I know this is hard, but the will is clear. And honestly, the apartment is the primary asset. It makes sense for it to go to us because we can handle the sale and distribution. The Virginia land is yours, but it's not really valuable in any practical sense." "What do you mean?" Garrett spoke up for the first time. "We looked into it. The property is 30 acres of dense forest with no road access. There's a trail, but no paved road. No electricity. No water or sewer. It's designated protected land because of the vegetation, which means you can't build on it or develop it. We pulled up the satellite images and it's just wilderness. We had a realtor look at it," Nate added. "Given the restrictions and the location, market value is maybe 60 to 80,000, possibly less. Honestly, it's more of a liability than an asset. Property taxes, maintenance, liability insurance for undeveloped land." Rose sat very still. "So you're telling me Harrison left me 30 acres of valueless forest?" "I wouldn't say valueless," Nate said quickly. "Just not commercially viable. Look, we're not trying to cheat you, Mom. The total estate value is about $2.6 million counting the apartment. The Virginia land is a fraction of that. We're happy to give you some additional compensation to make the split more equitable. Maybe we could arrange for you to keep some of the investment account funds. How generous, Rose said, and her voice came out flat and cold. Nate looked uncomfortable. Mom, I know you're upset. Do you? We're just trying to do what's best for everyone. The apartment is too big for one person anyway. And you'd have to handle the maintenance and the property taxes and everything. We were thinking you could move to a smaller place, something more manageable. Maybe a nice condo. We'd help you find something. Rose looked at her son. Really looked at him. 48 years old. Successful lawyer. Beautiful wife. 2 children in private school. And he was sitting in his office with its floor-to-ceiling windows and million-dollar view, telling her she needed to leave the home she'd lived in for 3 decades so he and his brother could sell it. I need to think about this, Rose said. Of course, Nate said. Take your time. Well, I mean, not unlimited time. We need to start probate proceedings, and there are some deadlines, but you have a few weeks at least. A few weeks. The will stipulates you can remain in the apartment for 90 days while we sort out the estate. That gives you 3 months to decide what you want to do. We think that's reasonable. Rose stood up. I'd like to see the property in Virginia. Nate blinked. Why? Because it's mine, according to the will. And I'd like to see it before I make any decisions. Mom, it's just forest. Dense wilderness in the Appalachian foothills. There's nothing there. Then it shouldn't matter if I go look at it. Garrett spoke up. It's a 5-hour drive. And like we said, there's no road access. You'd have to hike in. It's not exactly practical for someone your age. Rose looked at him. Someone my age. I just mean the terrain is rough. We're not trying to be difficult. We just don't see the point. The point, Rose said carefully, is that my husband left me that land, and I'm going to see it. She walked to the door and put her hand on the handle and then turned back. 3 months, she said. You're giving me 3 months in the apartment. That's what the will says, Nate confirmed. Fine. Then I'll take 3 months. The next 2 weeks passed in a strange gray fog that Rose moved through like she was underwater. People called. She didn't answer. The phone rang and eventually stopped, and then started again. And she sat in Harrison's armchair and listened to it ring and didn't move. The casserole dishes sat in the refrigerator and slowly turned into biology experiments. Rose ate crackers and cheese and toast, and once a can of soup she heated directly in the can on the stove because she couldn't find the energy to dirty a pot. She slept in the armchair because the bed felt too big and too empty. She'd wake up at odd hours, 2 in the morning, 4 in the morning with a crick in her neck, and the apartment dark and silent around her. On the 6th day, Vivian showed up with an interior designer. Rose heard them in the hallway before they knocked. Vivian's voice bright and professional, talking about square footage and natural light and original hardwood. Rose opened the door before they could knock. "Mrs. Whitmore," Vivian said, and she had the grace to look slightly embarrassed. "I hope we're not disturbing you. This is Amanda Sterling she's helping us think about the staging for when we list the apartment." The designer was young and pretty and holding a tablet and a measuring tape. "We're just going to take some quick measurements," Vivian continued. "We won't be in your way." Rose stood in the doorway and looked at them and thought about the word staging, about how it meant making something look like something it wasn't, making an empty apartment look like a home, making a place where someone had lived for 30 years look like a blank slate ready for the next person. "How long will you need?" Rose heard herself ask. 20 minutes, maybe," Vivian said. "Half hour at most." Rose stepped aside and let them in. She went to the kitchen and put water on for tea she didn't want, and listened to them move through the apartment, measuring walls, taking photos, discussing paint colors and whether the kitchen cabinets should be refaced or replaced entirely. "This floor will need to come up," she heard the designer say from the living room. "The hardwood is good, but it's old. Buyers in this price range expect more modern finishes." "What about the built-in shelves?" Vivian asked. "Honestly, I'd remove them. They're dated and they make the space feel smaller. Open it up, put in some floating shelves, much more contemporary." Rose poured hot water over a tea bag and watched it steep and thought about those built-in shelves. Harrison had installed them himself in 1995, spending 3 weekends measuring and cutting and fitting the wood until everything was perfectly level and square. He'd been so proud of them. They'd be ripped out and thrown in a dumpster and replaced with floating shelves from IKEA. When Vivian and the designer finally left, Rose walked through the apartment and saw it with new eyes. Not as her home, but as a product. 2,400 square feet of sellable real estate. Original molding period details needs updating, but strong bones. She stood in the center of the living room and turned in a slow circle and tried to imagine strangers living here. A young couple, probably. Tech money or finance money. They'd paint the walls gray, replace the floors, gut the kitchen. They'd stand on the terrace where Rose's basil had died and never know that for 30 years a woman had stood in this exact spot every Sunday morning, watering her herbs and looking out at the city and feeling something close to contentment. That night, Rose couldn't sleep. She lay in Harrison's armchair in the dark and stared at the ceiling and thought about 30 acres of forest in Virginia that her husband had bought without telling her and owned for 25 years without her knowing. 25 years. She got up and went to the bedroom and stood in front of Harrison's dresser. 6 drawers dark cherry wood bought from an estate sale in Queens in 1976. She'd cleaned out his clothes already, given them to Goodwill except for 2 flannel shirts she couldn't bring herself to part with. But she hadn't touched the nightstand. Harrison's nightstand had 3 drawers. The top drawer had his reading glasses and a book he'd been working through for 6 months about the history of American chestnut trees. The middle drawer had receipts and spare change, and a small flashlight that didn't work anymore. The bottom drawer stuck. Rose pulled on it, and it didn't budge. She pulled harder, and it gave a little but didn't open. She knelt down and looked at it and realized it wasn't locked. It was just swollen. The wood expanded from years of humidity. She went to the kitchen and got a butter knife and worked it into the crack and pried gently, and the drawer finally gave with a sound like a sigh. Inside were three things: a photograph of Rose Young, maybe 25, standing on a beach she didn't recognize, laughing at something or someone outside the frame. She was wearing a yellow sundress, and her hair was loose, and the wind was blowing it across her face. She looked happy, completely unself-consciously happy in a way Rose barely recognized. She had no memory of this photo being taken, no memory of that beach or that dress or that moment of happiness. The second thing was a piece of paper folded once with 5 words written in Harrison's small, precise handwriting: "You will never be alone." The third thing was an envelope, manila letter size, with her name on the front in the same handwriting, and below her name one sentence: "Open only when you're there." Rose sat on the bedroom floor holding the envelope and felt her hands start to shake. Where was there the Virginia property? It had to be. What else could it mean? She turned the envelope over. It wasn't sealed. The metal clasp was bent slightly, like it had been opened and closed multiple times. Like Harrison had put something in, taken it out, changed it, put it back. Rose's fingers went to the clasp. She could open it right now, read whatever was inside, know whatever Harrison had wanted her to know. But the instruction was clear: open only when you're there. Harrison had been a man of precision. Every word mattered. If he'd written "only when you're there," he meant only when you're there. Rose closed her eyes and pressed the envelope against her chest and felt something shift inside her. Some decision crystallizing that hadn't been fully formed before this moment. She was going to Virginia. She was going to see these 30 acres of forest that her husband had spent 25 years hiding from her. And she was going to open this envelope when she got there. The next morning, Rose called Emmett Sullivan. She found his number in the funeral home guest book, where he'd written it down, along with his Vermont address, and the words "call any time, day or night." The phone rang 4 times before he picked up. "Emmett Sullivan." "Emmett, it's Rose Whitmore." A pause. "Rose, you okay? I need help with something." "Name it." Harrison owned property in Virginia, 30 acres in Augusta County. "Did you know about it?" Another pause, longer this time. "Yeah, I knew." "You knew and didn't tell me." "Harrison made me promise not to. Said you'd find out when the time was right." Rose felt something hot flash through her. When exactly did he think the time would be right? After he was gone, I figured. Emmett's voice was gentle. "Rose, what's this about? I want to see it." "The property. But there's no road access and I don't know how to get there." "You want to go to the property?" "Yes." "Rose, I don't think that's a good idea." "I don't care what you think is a good idea. I'm asking if you know how to get there." Silence on the other end of the line. Then, "Yeah, I know how to get there. Harrison took me there once, 2 years ago maybe. Fall of 2018. Will you take me, Rose? Will you take me, or do I need to find someone else? She heard Emmett sigh. When do you want to go? As soon as possible. I'm in Vermont. It'll take me a day to drive down. Where are you? New York. Meet me in Staunton, Virginia. There's a hotel called the Hotel 24 South downtown near the courthouse. You know it. I'll find it. Give me 3 days. I'll meet you there Thursday morning. But, Rose, what? You should prepare yourself. It's not what you're expecting. What do you mean? But Emmett had already hung up. Rose packed a small suitcase, 2 changes of clothes, toiletries, the envelope from Harrison's drawer, the photograph of her young self laughing on a beach, the note that said, "You will never be alone." She checked her bank account. $530. Harrison's pension from the Forest Service would start soon, supposedly. But the paperwork was still processing, and she didn't know how much it would be. $530. She booked the cheapest hotel room she could find in Staunton. $66 a night. Booked it for 6 nights. Because she didn't know how long this would take and wanted to leave herself margin. $396 for 6 nights. That left her $134 for food and gas and whatever else came up. She had never in her life had to worry about money like this. Harrison had always handled the finances. She'd worked when the boys were young office jobs, administrative assistant at a dental clinic. Nothing that paid well, but they hadn't needed it to. Harrison made enough. They were comfortable. Not wealthy, but comfortable. And now she had $134 and no job and no apartment in 3 months. The thought should have terrified her, but it didn't. Instead, she felt something strange rising in her chest. Something that felt almost like anticipation. She left on a Tuesday morning. The bus to Staunton left Port Authority at 6:30 in the morning and would arrive at 8:30. 2 hours. Rose had never taken the bus anywhere in her life. She and Harrison had always driven or taken the train. But a bus ticket was $32 and driving would have cost more in gas. She sat in a window seat 3 rows from the back and watched New York City disappear behind her. The city gave way to suburbs, gave way to farmland, gave way to mountains. The Appalachians rose up around the highway. Old mountains worn down, covered in forest that was just starting to turn color for fall. Reds and oranges and yellows mixed in with the green. Rose pressed her forehead against the window and watched the mountains pass and thought about Harrison driving this road every weekend for 25 years. Leaving Friday night or Saturday morning, coming back Sunday evening. Always with an excuse. Work trip, research site, forestry survey. And she had believed him. Every single time. Because why wouldn't she? Harrison had never lied to her about anything that mattered. But he had lied about this. The Hotel 24 South was exactly where Emmett said it would be. Downtown Staunton, a brick building 3 stories tall, with a green awning and a hand-painted sign that looked like it had been there since 1950. The room was small and clean and smelled faintly of lemon cleaner. One double bed with a blue comforter. A TV bolted to the wall. A bathroom with a shower stall and toiletries in tiny bottles. A window that looked out at the old courthouse across the street. Red brick with white columns, Confederate monument in front that had been there so long the bronze had turned green. Rose set her suitcase on the bed and sat down next to it and looked around the room and thought about the apartment in New York. 2,400 square feet. This room was maybe 200. 1/10 the size. 1/10 of a life. She stayed in that room for 3 days. She wasn't hiding. She was waiting. Waiting for Thursday. Waiting for Emmett. But also waiting for something else she couldn't name. Some internal permission to do what she was about to do. She ate at a diner 2 blocks from the hotel. Breakfast and dinner. Coffee and toast in the morning. Soup and half a sandwich at night. Cheap. Simple. Food that required no decisions. On Wednesday night, she took the envelope out of her suitcase and held it in both hands and almost opened it. Open only when you're there. But where was there the property, the trail? Some specific location Harrison had in mind. She put the envelope back. Thursday morning came cold and clear. Rose woke at 5:30. Even though she'd set the alarm for 6. She showered and dressed in jeans and a flannel shirt and the hiking boots she'd bought at the outdoor store in Staunton the day before. $78 for the boots. More than she wanted to spend, but the woman at the store had explained about ankle support and waterproofing, and Rose had understood she couldn't hike into the Virginia wilderness in her 30-year-old sneakers. Emmett was waiting in the hotel lobby at 7. He looked older than he had at the funeral. Or maybe she just hadn't been paying attention at the funeral. 62 years old, with white hair that stuck up in every direction, and 3 days of beard and eyes that were kind and sad at the same time. He was wearing work boots and canvas pants and a flannel shirt and a jacket that had seen better days. "Rose," he said, and stood up from the lobby chair. "Emmett." They looked at each other for a moment, and then Emmett said, "You sure you want to do this?" "I'm sure. It's a bit of a drive, then a bit of a hike." "I know. And you don't know what you're going to find." Rose looked at him steadily. "That's why I'm going." Emmett studied her face for another moment and then nodded. "Okay, then. Let's go." His truck was parked on the street outside the hotel. An old Ford Green with rust around the wheel wells and 200,000 miles on the odometer, and a smell inside of diesel and mud and work. They drove south out of Staunton on Route 11 through farmland and small towns with names like Verona and Mint Spring, past roadside produce stands and churches and houses that looked like they'd been there since before the Civil War. Emmett didn't talk much. He drove with both hands on the wheel and his eyes on the road, and occasionally he'd point out a landmark. Old mill there used to grind corn. That farm's been in the same family for 200 years. Harrison and I surveyed timber in those woods back in 2003. After 40 minutes, Emmett turned off the highway onto a smaller road, 2 lanes, no center-line trees pressing in close on both sides. "We're getting close," he said. 10 minutes later, he pulled off onto what Rose wouldn't have even called a road. More like a wide spot where the trees pulled back enough for a vehicle to park. "This is it," Emmett said, and turned off the engine. Rose looked around. Trees in every direction. No buildings. No signs. Nothing but forest. "Where's the property?" Emmett pointed at what Rose now saw was a trail barely visible winding into the trees. 20 minutes that way. Maybe 25 for you and me. He got out of the truck and Rose followed. The temperature had dropped 10 degrees under the tree cover. Rose could see her breath. She zipped her jacket and adjusted her backpack and looked at the trail disappearing into the forest. Emmett walked over and stood next to her. "You ready?" Rose thought about the envelope in her backpack, about the photograph of her young self laughing, about Harrison spending 25 years coming to this place without her. "Yes," she said. They started walking. The trail was narrow, barely wide enough for one person. Rose walked behind Emmett and watched where he stepped, and tried to step in the same places. The ground was covered in leaves, thick layers of them orange and brown and red, and underneath the leaves was soft, dark earth that smelled like rain and rot and growth all mixed together. 10 steps in the road disappeared behind them. 20 steps in the sound of traffic vanished. Rose stopped and turned around and couldn't see the truck anymore. Couldn't see anything but trees. Oak and maple and something with white bark that might have been birch. And ferns. Huge ferns covering the ground in irregular waves like a green ocean that had frozen mid-surge. "You okay?" Emmett had stopped and turned back to check on her. "Fine," Rose said. "Just taking it in." They kept walking. The trail wound between trees that were so big, Rose couldn't have wrapped her arms around them. 100 years old at least. Maybe older. The kind of trees that had been here when the country was young, that had stood through wars and depressions, and all the small human dramas that happened in their shadows. The light changed as they went deeper. Not darker exactly. Different. Softer. Filtered through layers of leaves until it lost its harshness and became something gentler. Forest light. That's what Rose found herself thinking. This is what forest light looks like. There were birds. She couldn't see them, but she could hear them. Different calls coming from different heights. High-pitched trills from the canopy. Lower clicks and chirps from the understory. It sounded like a conversation in a language she didn't speak, but could somehow understand the rhythm of. And there was a smell. Not unpleasant. Damp earth and pine resin and something else. Something green and alive that didn't have a name, but that Rose's body recognized on some level, deeper than thought. They walked for 15 minutes. Rose's knee started to ache, the right one, the one that had been bothering her since she turned 65. But she didn't say anything. She just adjusted her pace and kept going. "Almost there," Emmett called back. "How do you know?" "I remember this part." See those two oak trees up ahead, growing together like that? Harrison called them the gateway, said they were like a doorway. Rose looked ahead and saw them. Two massive oak trees that had grown so close their trunks almost touched at the base, and their branches intertwined at the top, forming a natural arch over the trail. They walked toward the arch, and Emmett stopped a few feet before it. "Rose," he said, and turned to face her. "Harrison told me something when he brought me here. 2018. He said if anything happened to him, I should bring you here. But I should let you walk through alone. Said it was important that you see it first on your own terms. See what? I don't know if I should tell you. I think you need to see it." Rose felt her heart start to beat faster. "Emmett, what's through there?" He looked at her with those sad, kind eyes. "Harrison spent 25 years building something, and he built it for you. That's all I'm going to say." Rose reached into her backpack and pulled out the envelope. "He left me this in a drawer, with instructions to only open it when I was here." Emmett nodded. "Then I think here is on the other side of those trees." Rose stood holding the envelope and looking at the oak arch, and feeling like she was standing at the edge of something vast and irreversible. "You want me to wait here?" Emmett asked. "Yes, please. Take your time." Rose walked forward alone. She stopped under the arch and looked up. The branches overhead formed a canopy so thick it blocked most of the sky. Just small pieces of blue visible through the gaps. And in one of those gaps, a single leaf falling, spinning slowly in the still air, taking its time about landing. Rose watched it fall and thought about time. About how 25 years was 9,131 days. About how each of those days Harrison had driven here, or thought about driving here, or planned what he would do when he got here. 9,131 days of a secret. She opened the envelope. The paper inside was folded in thirds, neat and precise, the way Harrison folded everything. She unfolded it and saw his handwriting, small and careful, filling the entire page front and back. The first line said, "Rose, if you're reading this standing at the oak arch, then I'm gone. And you're about to see what I spent 931 days building." Rose's vision blurred. She blinked hard, and the words came back into focus. That's 25 years counted in days, because every single day mattered. I built this house 1 room per year. Every wall holds a story of ours. I know you have questions. Why didn't I tell you? Why did I hide this? I'll explain everything. But first, you need to see it. You need to walk through this arch and look ahead and understand what love looks like when it's built by hand over a quarter century. Walk forward, Rose. I'll be waiting on the other side. Not in body, but in every piece of wood. I cut every joint I fitted, every window I placed to catch the morning light the way you always loved. Walk forward. Rose folded the letter and put it back in the envelope. She took a breath. She stepped through the arch, and she saw it. For a moment, Rose thought her eyes were playing tricks on her. The forest was so dense, the light so filtered and strange, that what she was seeing didn't make sense. Her brain couldn't process it. Trees, yes. Ferns, yeah. The continuation of wilderness she'd been walking through for 20 minutes. But there in the middle of it all, something that shouldn't exist. A house. A whole house rising up from the forest floor, like it had grown there, like it was as much a part of the landscape as the oaks and maples surrounding it. Rose stood frozen at the oak arch, one hand still gripping the envelope, and tried to understand what she was seeing. The house was L-shaped, tucked into a natural clearing where the old-growth trees pulled back just enough to allow sunlight to reach the ground. But the trees hadn't been cut down. They were still there, forming a living wall around the structure, their branches reaching over the roof like they were sheltering it. The walls were wood, dark honey-colored wood that gleamed even in the dappled forest light. Walnut. The wood had been cut and fitted with such precision that she could see the joints from where she stood. Dovetails and mortise and tenon, the kind of joinery that didn't need nails because the wood itself held together through geometric perfection. The roof was dark colonial tile, steep-pitched to shed rain and snow with a generous overhang that kept water away from the walls. And there on the corner that received the most sun, 2 solar panels mounted on a green-painted iron frame that looked hand-welded. There were windows, 4 on the main facade, 2 on the eastern wing, all of them wood frame with interior shutters visible through the glass. And beneath each window a wooden planter box where ferns had taken root and grown in cascading green waterfalls that reached halfway down the wall. The front door was solid walnut with cast iron hinges and a matching latch. And carved into the upper section so subtle Rose almost missed it, a pattern of oak leaves that you could only see if you knew to look for it. Rose's knees buckled and she sat down hard on the trail, still staring, the envelope clutched in both hands now. From behind her she heard Emmett's voice, gentle. "You okay?" She couldn't answer, couldn't speak, could barely breathe. Emmett walked up and stood beside her, not touching, just present. "First time I saw it, I had the same reaction," he said quietly. "Sat down right about where you're sitting now. Couldn't believe it was real." "How?" Rose managed. "How is this possible?" "Harrison built it. One weekend at a time. Sometimes during the week, too, if he could get away. 25 years of weekends adds up to a lot of hours. But the materials, the tools, how did he get everything out here?" Emmett pointed to the trail they'd just walked. "Wheelbarrow, handcart, his own back. I helped him sometimes in the later years. We'd load up the truck drive to the access point, then haul it in piece by piece. 2x4s, bags of concrete for the foundation, roof tiles. Every single thing you see, someone carried it in on that trail." Rose shook her head. "I don't understand. Why didn't he tell me?" "I think that's in the letter," Emmett said. Rose looked down at the envelope in her hands. She'd only read the first page. There had been more. She pulled the pages out again, unfolded them, found where she'd stopped reading. Harrison's handwriting continued on the second page. "You're probably sitting down right now. That's okay. I sat down the first time I saw this clearing too, back in 1995, when it was just grass and saplings and possibility. Sat down and cried like a child. because I knew I'd found it. The place I'd been looking for without knowing I was looking. I'm going to tell you the whole story now. You deserve the whole story. March 1995. I was on a field survey for the Forest Service cataloging bromeliads in this region. Drove down from Virginia Tech in a rental truck. Got a flat tire on Route 11 just south of Staunton. Pulled over to change it, and while I was standing there looking at the shoulder, I noticed a trail leading into the woods. Not on any of my maps, just a deer path, really. But you know me, I can't leave a trail without following it. I walked in. 20 minutes later, I found this clearing. Rose, I don't know if you've ever had the experience of seeing a place and knowing instantly and completely that it's yours. Not in a legal sense, in a deeper sense. Like the place was waiting for you. Like it called you there. I stood in this clearing for an hour, maybe longer. And I thought about our life, about the apartment in New York, about the boys, about you, about how you'd given up so much to be a wife and mother, your job, your time, your dreams. You never complained. You never made me feel like it was a sacrifice. But I saw it anyway. And I thought, I'm gonna build something here. For her. For Rose. Something that will be completely hers. Rose's fingers trembled as she held the paper. She steadied it against her knees and kept reading. I bought the land in November 1995. 30 acres. Protected natural area because of the native plant species, which meant it couldn't be subdivided or commercially developed. Most people saw that as a limitation. I saw it as protection. No one could take this away once it was designated protected land. The purchase price was $12,000. I had it in savings. Money I'd been setting aside for years without really knowing why. Some instinct that told me to keep a reserve. To be ready for something. I didn't tell you about the purchase because I didn't know yet what I was going to do with it. I just knew I needed to own this place before someone else did. It took me a year to decide. A year of driving out here on weekends, sitting in this clearing thinking. And then in 1996, I knew I was going to build you a house. Not a cabin, not a shed. A house. A real house with a foundation and walls and a roof and windows. A house that would last 200 years. A house that would be here long after I was gone, waiting for you to find it. I started in the spring of 1996. Rose looked up from the letter. Tears ran down her face unchecked. Emmett stood a few feet away with his back turned, giving her privacy. She looked at the house again, and this time she saw it differently. Not as an impossible structure, but as an accumulation. 9,000 days of work, of planning, of love translated into wood and stone and effort. Every wall holds a story of ours Harrison had written. Rose stood up. Her legs were steady now. She walked forward slowly, crossing the clearing, and the house got larger as she approached. She could see details now that had been invisible from a distance. the way the wood grain ran vertical on the walls, the slight variation in color between boards, lighter here, darker there, because they'd been cut from different trees. The hand-forged iron hinges on the door, each one slightly different, because they'd been made individually, not mass-produced. She reached the door and put her hand on it. The wood was smooth and warm, alive somehow. She could feel the grain under her palm. The latch lifted easily. The door wasn't locked. Rose pushed and it swung open with a sound that was nothing like the dragging scrape of old wood. It was a clean sound, a click of resistance, and then a smooth swing. A door built to last and maintained in the condition of lasting. The smell that came out first was wood. Clean dry wood with a base note of linseed oil. And underneath that, deeper, a smell of earth and resin and something green that came through ventilation gaps and made the interior smell like careful construction and living forest mixed together. Rose stepped inside. The entry was short, maybe 6 feet, opening into a main living room. She stood in the doorway and looked. The room was 20 feet by 26, with 11-foot ceilings that made the space feel vast. The walls were wood, the same dark honey walnut as the exterior laid in vertical planks. The floor was different wood, lighter yellowish, laid in a herringbone pattern that was so precise it looked like artwork. Cedar. Yellow cedar. 3 large windows on the north wall let in that soft forest light. And along the window wall stood a long table, rustic but beautifully made, with 4 simple chairs with raw leather seats. In the center of the table sat a ceramic pot with a lid. Rose walked over and lifted the lid. Inside was a handwritten list of instructions for maintaining the house systems. Water collection, solar panel maintenance, wood treatment schedule. All in Harrison's small, careful handwriting. The opposite wall had a floor-to-ceiling bookshelf built into the structure itself, not added on but integrated into the wall. And it was full of books. Rose walked over and ran her fingers along the spines. Tropical botany, silviculture, forest ecology, environmental cartography. She recognized some of these. Harrison's professional library that he'd kept in his study in the New York apartment. But there were others she'd never seen. Novels, poetry, Mary Oliver, Wendell Berry, an old edition of Walden with a spine so broken it looked like it had been read 50 times. And on the left side of the shelf at Rose's eye level, a row of photo albums, 11 of them bound in brown leather, numbered on the spine in pencil. Rose pulled out number 1. The first photograph showed the clearing, empty. Just grass and young trees and sunlight. The date printed below April 1996. The second photo showed a hole in the ground. Foundation excavation. May 1996. The third showed wooden forms for concrete. Harrison standing next to them, younger, maybe 49 years old, wearing work clothes and holding a shovel. Rose had never seen this photograph, had never known it existed. She turned pages. The foundation taking shape. Concrete poured. Curing. The first wall frame going up. Harrison and another man she didn't recognize working together to lift a heavy beam. Each photo was dated. Each photo showed progress. The house growing from nothing, from dirt and plans and impossible effort. Rose closed the album carefully and put it back on the shelf. The kitchen was at the back of the living room, separated not by a wall but by a change in flooring. The wood planks gave way to terracotta tile in a warm ochre color. The kitchen had a stone countertop, not granite or marble, something rougher, more natural, with a gray-green color and a slightly uneven surface that had been sealed smooth. The cabinets were wood with louvered doors that let air circulate. There was a sink with a metal faucet, a gas stove connected to a propane tank under the counter, a small refrigerator, cream-colored, old-fashioned looking but clean. Rose opened the refrigerator. It was off, unplugged, empty except for a box of baking soda to absorb odors. She opened a cabinet. Inside were shelves stocked with glass jars, rice, beans, salt, sugar, coffee, oil, and a row of preserved foods in mason jars with metal lids and handwritten labels. Rose picked up one of the jars and read the label. Pickled Ramps, July 2019. July 2019. 16 months before Harrison died. He had been here 16 months before he died. Had been here picking ramps and pickling them and putting them in jars with careful labels and storing them in this cabinet. For her. Rose set the jar down carefully. A hallway led from the kitchen toward the back of the house. 2 doors on the left. Rose opened the first one. A small bedroom. Single bed with a blue wool blanket. A window looking out into the forest. A simple bookshelf with field guides and nature writing. The guest room. Rose closed that door and opened the second. The master bedroom. It was bigger than the guest room, but still modest. Maybe 12 by 14. A double bed in the center made up with a white sheet pulled tight and smooth like someone had just made it that morning. 2 nightstands. Identical. Simple wood construction. The one on the left had a lamp. The one on the right had a lamp too. And on the right nightstand, a photograph in a wooden frame. Rose walked over and picked it up. It was her. Young, maybe 25, standing on a beach she still didn't remember, laughing at something outside the frame. The same photograph that had been in Harrison's drawer in New York. But this copy was larger. And the frame was here. On her side of the bed. In this house in the middle of a forest that no one knew about. Waiting for her. Rose sat down on the bed and held the photograph and finally let herself cry. Not the careful, controlled crying she'd done at the funeral. Not the silent tears she'd shed reading Harrison's letter. This was something else. Something that came from deeper than grief. From some place in her chest that had been locked tight for 47 years and was only now opening. She cried for 20 minutes, maybe longer. Time stopped meaning anything. When she finally stopped, wrung out and empty, she looked around the room again. There was a closet. She opened it, empty except for a few wooden hangers. There was a dresser. She opened the top drawer. Empty. The second drawer, empty. The third drawer stuck. Rose pulled harder and it opened with the same sighing sound as the drawer in New York. And inside was another envelope, smaller than the first one, letter-sized, with her name on the front and a date August 2019, 15 months before Harrison died. Rose sat back down on the bed and opened the envelope. The letter inside was shorter than the first, only 2 pages. But the handwriting was shakier, less controlled. Rose, if you found this drawer, then you've been here long enough to explore. Long enough to see not just the house, but what the house means. Good. Because this second letter is different from the first. The first letter was about what I built. This letter is about why. I'm 72 years old as I write this. My heart has been giving me warnings for 2 years. Irregular rhythms, palpitations. My doctor wants me on medication, wants me to slow down. I've been ignoring him because I still have things to finish here. I haven't told you about my heart because I didn't want you to worry. Didn't want you to try to stop me from coming here. These weekends in the forest are the only time I feel like I'm doing something that matters. You're gonna read that sentence and think, I'm saying our life together didn't matter. That's not what I mean. Our life together was everything. You were everything. But somewhere in the middle of being a husband and a father and a professional, I lost track of how to show you that. I was never good with words. You know that. I showed love through work, through providing, through being steady and reliable and present. But I never showed you that you were the foundation of everything, that without you none of it meant anything. So I built this. Every board I cut, I thought about you. Every joint I fitted, I thought about how you deserved something beautiful. Every window I placed, I made sure it would catch the light the way you always loved. The windows face east because you always loved mornings. The bed is on the right side because that was always your side. The bookshelf has all the books I knew you wanted to read but never had time for because you were too busy taking care of everyone else. The garden outside has the herbs you use: basil, rosemary, parsley, lemon verbena. The orchard has orange and lemon and apple and pawpaw because you always said the pawpaw was the most beautiful fruit that existed, and it was a crime nobody planted them anymore. This house is not just a house, Rose. It's your second life. The life where you're not someone's wife or someone's mother, where you're just Rose. And Rose deserves 3,000 books and a forest and a future where no one can take anything from you again. I know about the boys. I've known for years what they would do. I've watched them grow into men who measure value in dollars and see their mother as support structure instead of as a person. It broke my heart, but I also knew I couldn't change them. So I planned for them. I gave them the apartment and the investment accounts in the will. Legal, clear. Exactly what they expected. And I gave you this. Something they don't know about. Something they can't touch. Something protected by federal conservation status and property law, and 25 years of careful planning. They kept the concrete. You kept the forest, and the forest always mattered more. Rose stopped reading, put the letter down, looked around the room. Harrison had known exactly what would happen after he died, had spent 25 years building a safeguard against his own sons. She picked up the letter again. There's something else you need to know. Something I discovered that changes everything. This land isn't just beautiful. It's valuable. Really valuable. In a way the boys will never understand, because they only see value in things they can sell. I spent 25 years cataloging the species on this property. I'm a forestry specialist. It's what I do. And what I found here is extraordinary. There are 12 native species on this land that are on the federal endangered species list. Yellow lady's slipper orchid. 3 species of bromeliad that only appear at this elevation with this specific humidity. 2 endemic orchids. The Appalachian running cedar, which was declared locally extinct in 1982. I rediscovered it here in 2006, documented it. But I didn't publish the finding because I wanted to protect this land first. Those 12 species make this property eligible for the Federal Conservation Reserve Enhancement Program. The current payment rate is $55,000 per year, indexed to inflation for as long as the program exists. $55,000 per year, Rose, just for protecting land that's already protected. I also contacted Dr. Vivian Ashford at NYU. She's a colleague. I showed her this land in 2017. She wants to use it as a field research station for the graduate ecology program. She submitted a formal proposal, $27,000 per year in usage fees. 10-year contract, renewable. The university handles maintenance. You stay in the house whenever you want. No restrictions. And there's the carbon credits. I spent 15 years doing active reforestation on 22 of the 30 acres. Planted white oak, tulip poplar, American chestnut red maple, native species at appropriate density for sustainable management. I had the carbon stock evaluated by Green Carbon Solutions in Richmond. Their preliminary assessment, $1.14 million in carbon credits negotiable on the voluntary market over 30 years of sustainable management. Added up, Rose, $55,000 per year from the conservation program, $27,000 per year from NYU, $1.14 million in carbon credits. The boys got $170,000 in investments. One time. Total. You're looking at $82,000 a year. Every year. For as long as you live. Plus over $1 million in long-term carbon value. They kept the concrete. You kept the forest. And the forest is worth more than they'll earn in a lifetime. Rose read that paragraph 3 times. $82,000 a year. She had been living on Harrison's pension, which hadn't started yet, and the $530 in her checking account, and she was worried about hotel bills and bus tickets. And Harrison had left her $82,000 a year. The letter continued. All the documentation is in the study. There's a blue folder on the desk. Inside you'll find Species assessments for all 12 endangered species, complete with photos. GPS coordinates observation records, federal listing status. The topographic survey of the property completed in 2018. Dr. Ashford's proposal from NYU signed and sealed. The carbon credit evaluation from Green Carbon Solutions, and the contact information for attorney Claudia Brennan in Richmond. She's an environmental lawyer I hired in 2018 to handle all the paperwork. Everything is pre-filed. The conservation program application, the carbon credit certification, the NYU contract. All you have to do is go to her office, bring the deed and my death certificate, and she'll initiate everything. She's expecting you. I told her you'd be coming. I've thought of everything, Rose. Every detail. Every contingency. Because I spent 25 years making sure that when I was gone, you would be protected. Not just housed. Not just comfortable. Protected. Safe. Independent. Free. There was one more paragraph. One more thing. The orchid by the north window. I planted it in 1996, the same year I bought this land. It blooms every October. 23 Octobers so far. By the time I'm writing this, I won't see the 24th. But you will, and when you do know that I'm still here. In every board I cut, every joint I fitted, every window I placed to catch the light for you. I love you more than I knew how to say while I was alive. This house is me saying it now. Harrison, P.S. There's a stream 200 yards behind the house. I had the water tested in 2018. Mineral spring. Same composition as the commercial springs they bottle in this region. A business contact estimated $12,000 to $16,000 per year in licensing royalties if you want to lease it for bottling. But I think you should leave it as a stream. Some things are worth more as they are. Rose sat on the bed holding the letter and felt something fundamental shift inside her. For 47 years, she had been someone's wife, someone's mother, someone's support system. The person who made sure everyone else's life worked smoothly, while her own life became smaller and smaller, until it was just routines and obligations and the slow, steady disappearance of the self. And Harrison had seen it, had watched it happen, had spent 25 years building her a way out, not an escape, an emergence, a second life. The life she'd given up when she married at 22 and had children at 24, and became the person everyone needed her to be. She stood up and walked to the north window. There was the orchid, in a wooden planter box mounted just outside the glass. She could see it clearly through the window, not blooming yet. It was September. But the buds were there, small and green and tight, waiting for October. 23 years. It had bloomed 23 times while Harrison was alive. This would be the 24th. Rose pressed her hand against the window glass and looked at the orchid and thought about constancy, about something blooming every year at the same time for 23 years. about faithfulness that didn't require an audience, about beauty that existed whether anyone was watching or not. Behind her, she heard footsteps on the porch. Emmett's voice gentle. "Rose, you okay in there?" She turned from the window. "Yes, come in." Emmett stepped through the front door and stopped looking around the living room with an expression that was part wonder, part sadness. "I've only been here twice," he said. "Once when Harrison showed it to me in 2018. Once after he died to make sure everything was locked up. Still takes my breath away." "Did you know," Rose asked, "about the money, the conservation program, and the carbon credits? I knew there was more to it than just a house. Harrison told me the land was valuable. He didn't give me numbers, but he said you'd be taken care of. Said he'd made sure of it." Rose walked back into the living room and sat down at the table. "He spent 25 years planning for me to be okay without him. That's what love looks like sometimes," Emmett said. "When you can't say it with words, you say it with work." "Did he ever talk about the boys, about what they'd do after he died?" Emmett hesitated, then nodded. "Once. We were out here working on the solar panel installation. Must have been 2012. He stopped in the middle of tightening a bolt and just said, 'My sons are going to try to take everything from Rose when I'm gone.' Said it matter of fact, like he was stating a weather forecast." "What did you say?" I asked if he was sure. He said he'd been sure since they were teenagers, that he'd watched them grow into men who only valued things they could quantify and sell. He said it broke his heart, but he couldn't change them. So he was going to outplan them instead. Emmett walked over to the bookshelf and ran his hand along the wood. "He showed me the books he'd bought for you. Told me which ones were about topics you'd mentioned wanting to learn about. Botany, native species, poetry." He had a list. 25 years of paying attention to every casual comment you made about books you wanted to read. Rose felt her throat tighten. "I need to see the rest of it. The study. The documentation." "It's through that door," Emmett said, pointing to a door off the hallway Rose hadn't noticed before. She stood and walked to the door and opened it. The study was smaller than the bedrooms, but perfectly proportioned. Maybe 10 by 12. A desk under a window that faced east. Shelves on 3 walls. A chair that looked handmade with a curved back that would fit the human spine exactly. On the desk sat Harrison's laptop unplugged but there. His field GPS. His measuring tools. And a blue folder. Rose sat down in the chair and opened the folder. The first document was labeled Species Assessment, Yellow Lady's Slipper Orchid. It had photographs, GPS coordinates, observation records dating back to 1998, Federal Endangered Species Listing status. Everything official and documented and thorough. There were 11 more just like it, one for each species. Behind those were the topographic maps, professional survey work showing the property boundaries, elevation changes, water features, forest composition. Behind that was Dr. Vivian Ashford's proposal from NYU. 5 pages on official letterhead. signed and dated April 2017. $27,000 per year for field research station access. 10-year initial contract with automatic renewal options. Behind that was the carbon credit assessment. 12 pages of methodology and calculations. The final number on page 12, $1.14 million in tradable carbon credits over 30 years of sustainable forest management. And at the bottom of the folder, a business card. Attorney Claudia Brennan, Environmental Law, Richmond, Virginia. A phone number written in Harrison's handwriting with a note. Everything is ready. She's expecting you. Rose sat at Harrison's desk and did math. $55,000 from the conservation program, $27,000 from NYU, $82,000 per year, every year, plus $1.14 million in carbon credits. The apartment in New York was worth $2.4 million, split between Nate and Garrett, $1.2 million each. This forest was worth more than both of them combined would get from selling their inheritance, and they had called it valueless. Dense wilderness with no road access, no electricity, no practical value. Rose started to laugh. She couldn't help it. The laugh came out harsh and sharp and a little bit wild. She laughed until her sides hurt, and Emmett appeared in the doorway looking concerned. Rose. They said it had no value, Rose said, and she was still laughing. My sons looked at this property and said it wasn't worth anything. Emmett's mouth twitched. To be fair, they didn't see the house, because they never bothered to come look. They pulled up satellite images and saw trees and decided it was nothing. Rose wiped her eyes. Harrison knew they'd do exactly that. He counted on it. He was a smart man. He was a genius. Rose stood up and held the blue folder to her chest. He gave them exactly what they wanted. The apartment, the investments, everything they could see and measure and sell. And he gave me everything they couldn't. She looked at Emmett. When did you say Harrison showed you this place? Fall 2018, October, I think. 2 years before he died. About that, yeah. He knew his heart was failing. He wrote in the letter he'd had warnings for 2 years. Rose walked to the window and looked out at the forest. He spent his last 2 years finishing this, making sure every detail was perfect, making sure I'd be taken care of. He loved you, Emmett said simply. I know. Rose turned back to face him. I need to ask you something. You've been here. You've seen this place. Is there a caretaker? Someone who maintains it? Yeah. Local man named Porter Callahan. Harrison hired him in the early 90s. Porter lives about 2 kilometers from here in a cabin on the edge of the property. He's been coming once a week for 30 years to maintain the system's clean harvest from the garden and orchard. Orchard, Emmett smiled. You haven't seen the outside yet. Come on. He led Rose out the front door onto a porch she hadn't noticed when she first arrived. Wide enough for chairs with a railing made from branches that had been stripped and sanded smooth, but kept their natural curves. The clearing was bigger than it had looked from the trail. maybe half an acre of open space with the forest pressing in on all sides. To the left of the house was a garden, raised beds made from stacked stone. Rose could see herbs growing there: basil, rosemary, parsley, and vegetables. Tomatoes staked and heavy with fruit, squash vines sprawling. To the right was the orchard, 24 trees in neat rows: apple, orange, lemon. And in the back corner, 3 trees Rose recognized by their large, tropical-looking leaves. Pawpaw. He planted those pawpaws in 1998, Emmett said. Took 10 years before they fruited. But he was patient. Rose walked over to the pawpaw trees. There was fruit hanging from the branches. Green, not ripe yet, but there. The most beautiful fruit that existed, she had said, once, probably 20 years ago. Probably in passing, and Harrison had remembered and planted trees and waited a decade for them to bear fruit. For her. I need to see Porter, Rose said, the caretaker. I need to thank him. He's probably at his cabin. I can take you there if you want. It's a short walk. Not today. Rose turned and looked back at the house, at the walnut walls and the colonial tile roof and the solar panels catching the afternoon light, at the ferns cascading from the window boxes, and the door with the carved oak leaves and the porch with the branch railings. Today I just need to sit here and understand what this means. Emmett nodded. I'll be at the truck. Take all the time you need. He walked back toward the trail, and Rose sat down on the porch steps and looked at the forest and felt 73 years of life rearrange themselves into something new. She had been married for 47 years, had raised 2 sons, had kept a home and managed a household, and been the steady foundation everyone relied on. And she had thought that was her whole life. Thought that when Harrison died and the boys took the apartment, she would become a smaller version of herself. A widow living in a cheap hotel or a studio apartment somewhere. Dependent, diminished. Grateful for whatever scraps of attention her sons decided to give her. But Harrison had seen a different future. He had seen Rose at 73 with decades still ahead of her. Had seen those decades not as decline but as possibility. Had spent 25 years building the infrastructure for her second life. Not a retirement, a beginning. Rose pulled out Harrison's letter and read the last lines again. This house is not just a house. It's your second life. The life where you're not someone's wife or someone's mother. Where you're just Rose. Just Rose. She tried to remember the last time she had been just Rose. Before she was Harrison's wife. Before she was Nate and Garrett's mother. Before she was the woman who managed the household and made sure everyone else's life ran smoothly. 1971, maybe. When she was 20 years old and working at the pharmacy in Harper's Ferry, and Harrison walked in asking for antifungal cream and stayed to talk about oak trees. 52 years ago. And now at 73, she was getting a second chance, a second beginning. A second 20-year-old Rose who got to decide what she wanted without considering everyone else first. Rose stood up and walked around the side of the house. There was the stream. She could hear it now. 200 yards back through the trees, the sound of water over stone. That sound Harrison had described in his notes as the sound of a Saturday morning. She walked toward it and found a narrow path through the ferns. Followed the path until the trees opened up, and there was the stream. Maybe 10 feet wide, running clear over smooth gray stones. Fast enough to make noise, but slow enough that you could see the bottom. Rose knelt down and put her hand in the water. It was cold. Mountain cold. She cupped some in her palm and tasted it. Clean. Mineral. Slightly sweet. $12,000 to $16,000 a year in licensing royalties, if she wanted to lease it for bottling. But I think you should leave it as a stream Harrison had written. Some things are worth more as they are. Rose looked at the water running over the stones and thought about value. About how the world measured things in dollars, but some things had worth that couldn't be quantified. A stream that sounded like Saturday morning. An orchid that bloomed every October for 23 years. A house built board by board over 9,000 days by a man who loved his wife more than he knew how to say. She stood up and walked back to the house. Emmett was sitting on the porch steps where she'd been sitting before. "You ready to go?" he asked. "Not yet," Rose said. "I need to make a phone call first. Is there cell service here?" "Spotty, but there's a spot by the study window where it usually works. Harrison set it up that way on purpose. Wanted to be able to make calls when he needed to." Rose went back inside and found her phone in her backpack. 1 bar of service at the study window. Enough. She pulled out attorney Claudia Brennan's business card and dialed the number. The phone rang twice before a woman answered. "Brennan, Environmental Law, this is Claudia." "Miss Brennan, my name is Rose Whitmore. My husband was Harrison Whitmore." A pause. Then the woman's voice changed, became warmer. "Mrs. Whitmore, I've been waiting for your call. I'm so sorry for your loss." "Thank you. Your husband was an extraordinary man. He came to my office in 2018 with the most detailed environmental conservation plan I've ever seen. We've been preparing for this moment for 2 years. He told me everything is ready. It is. All the applications are pre-filed. The conservation program, the carbon credit certification, the NYU research contract. All we need is for you to come to Richmond with the property deed and the death certificate. I'll initiate everything and we should have approvals within 90 days. 90 days. The federal conservation program usually takes longer, but your husband's documentation is so thorough they'll fast-track it." He thought of everything Mrs. Whitmore. Every possible question they could ask he already answered. Rose closed her eyes. "When can I come to Richmond?" "Whenever you're ready. I've blocked time every Thursday afternoon for the next month. Just call the day before and let me know you're coming. I'll call you next week. I look forward to meeting you, Mrs. Whitmore. Your husband spoke about you often. He was very proud of what he was building for you." Rose hung up and sat at Harrison's desk and looked at the laptop and the GPS and the measuring tools and all the evidence of 25 years of careful planning. She opened the laptop. It turned on. The battery was dead, but there was a charger plugged into the solar system. She plugged in the laptop and waited for it to boot up. The desktop background was a photograph. Rose recognized it immediately. The two of them on their wedding day in 1973. Standing outside the Methodist Church in Harper's Ferry. Harrison in his gray suit that was too big in the shoulders. Rose in the white dress her mother had sewn with the lace collar and the satin buttons down the back. They looked impossibly young, 26 and 22. Children playing at being adults. Rose touched the screen where Harrison's face was and felt her throat close up. "I understand now," she whispered. "I understand what you were doing." She closed the laptop and stood up and walked back outside. Emmett was still on the porch. "I'm ready," Rose said. "Back to the hotel. Yes, I need to think. I need to process all this. And then I need to come back." They walked together back to the trail. Back through the oak arch, back through 20 minutes of forest that felt different now that Rose knew what waited at the end of it. When they reached the truck, Emmett turned to her. "What are you going to do?" Rose looked back at the trail. She couldn't see the house from here. Couldn't see anything but trees. But she knew it was there. Waiting. "I'm going to call my sons," she said. "And I'm going to tell them exactly what their father left me." Rose waited 3 days before calling Nate. Not because she was afraid. Not because she needed time to gather courage. She waited because she wanted to be absolutely certain of what she was gonna say. Wanted to speak from a place of clarity rather than anger. Wanted to make sure that when she laid out the truth, it would land with the full weight of what Harrison had done. She spent those 3 days at the Hotel 24 South, reading through every document in the blue folder, learning the scientific names of the 12 endangered species, studying the topographic maps until she could close her eyes and see the property boundaries, the elevation changes, the water features, memorizing the numbers. 55,000 from conservation, 27,000 from NYU, 1.14 million in carbon credits. She wanted to know it all. Wanted to be able to answer any question Nate might throw at her with the precision of someone who had done the work to understand exactly what she owned. On the 3rd evening, she sat on the hotel bed with her phone in her hand and Nate's number on the screen, and thought about the last conversation they'd had. The office with the floor-to-ceiling windows. The papers spread across his desk. The careful lawyer voice telling her the Virginia property had no practical value. Dense wilderness with no road access. Rose pressed call. The phone rang 4 times. She almost thought it would go to voicemail. Then Nate answered and she could hear noise in the background. Voices, music. He was at some kind of event. "Mom, hold on, let me step outside." The background noise faded, a door closing. Then Nate's voice clearer. "Sorry about that. We're at a benefit dinner. Is everything okay?" "Everything's fine," Rose said. "I need to talk to you about the Virginia property." "Oh." A pause. "Did you go look at it?" "I did." And I told you it was just forest. We weren't exaggerating, Mom. It's really not worth the trouble of Nate, Rose said, and her voice came out harder than she'd intended. Let me talk. Don't interrupt. Can you do that? Silence on the other end. Then, okay. Rose took a breath. I spent the last 3 days going through documentation your father left. Very detailed documentation. Professional surveys, species assessments, financial projections. Your father was a forestry specialist. He knew exactly what he owned. Mom, I don't understand. I said don't interrupt. Rose stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the courthouse across the street. The Virginia property has 12 native plant species that are listed on the Federal Endangered Species Registry. Your father spent 25 years cataloging them, documenting them, building a case for federal conservation protection. She could hear Nate breathing on the other end of the line. Those 12 species make the property eligible for the Federal Conservation Reserve Enhancement Program. The current payment rate is $55,000 per year, indexed to inflation. For as long as the program exists, $55,000. I'm not finished. Rose's voice was steel now. Your father also negotiated a contract with NYU to use the property as a field research station for their graduate ecology program. $27,000 per year. 10-year contract with automatic renewal options. The university handles all maintenance. I can live on the property whenever I want with no restrictions. Nate didn't say anything. And then there's the carbon credits. Your father spent 15 years doing active reforestation on 22 of the 30 acres. White oak tulip poplar, American chestnut red maple. All native species planted at appropriate density for sustainable management. He had the carbon stock professionally evaluated. $1.14 million in tradable carbon credits over 30 years. Rose heard what sounded like Nate sitting down, or maybe leaning against something. Do the math, Nate. $82,000 per year, every year, plus over $1 million in carbon value. The apartment you and Garrett are getting is worth $2.4 million. Split between you, that's $1.2 million each. One time. Total. This forest generates more annual income than either of you will get from investing your inheritance. Mom. Nate's voice sounded strange, hollow. We didn't know. I know you didn't know. Your father made sure you didn't know. He explained it very clearly in a letter he left me. He knew exactly what you would do. He knew you'd look at 30 acres of forest and see no value because you only value things you can quantify and sell. So he gave you exactly what you wanted. The apartment, the investments, everything you could see and measure. And he gave me everything you couldn't. If we had known, if you'd known, the division would have been different. Yes. You said that already 3 days ago when you called. But Nate, here's what you need to understand. The will is legal. The distribution is final. You both signed documents stating the Virginia property had no market value. I have those documents. and I have a very good environmental lawyer in Richmond who has spent 2 years preparing all the paperwork. Rose could hear voices in the background on Nate's end, someone asking if he was coming back. I'm not contesting anything, Rose continued. I'm not asking for a review. I don't need to. I have what I need. What your father spent 25 years building for me. But I'm also not dividing anything with you. Not 1 acre. Not $1. Because there is nothing to divide. Everything here belongs to me. Was planned to belong to me. Is properly documented and registered in my name. Mom, Nate's voice cracked. We were wrong. Yes, you were. We treated you like... He stopped, started again. We treated you like you were a burden to be managed, like you were a problem to be solved. The apartment, the timeline moving you out. We never asked what you wanted, we just decided what was most convenient for us. Rose felt something loosen in her chest. Not forgiveness exactly, but recognition. Her son was capable of seeing his mistakes. That was something. I'm not going to lie to you, Rose said. I'm angry. I'm hurt. You took the home I lived in for 30 years and gave me 90 days to leave so you could sell it. You didn't ask. You just informed me that's how it would be. Like I didn't have a say in my own life. I'm sorry. Nate sounded like he meant it. Mom, I'm truly sorry. We can talk about the apartment. We can extend the timeline. We can... No, Rose said. I don't want the apartment. What? I don't want to stay in the apartment. I'm not going to fight you for it. I'm leaving in 90 days just like you planned. But I'm not moving to some small condo you picked out for me. I'm moving to Virginia. To the house your father built. Silence. There's a house. Nate's voice was small. There's a house, 1,900 square feet. Your father built it over 25 years. 1 room per year. Every board cut by hand. Every joint fitted without nails. It has a library with 3,000 books. A kitchen with a stone counter. A garden. An orchard. Solar panels. Rainwater collection. Everything I need to live independently for as long as I want. I don't understand. How did he build a house on protected forest land? Very carefully. Very legally. With all the proper documentation. Your father was a professional, Nate. He knew what he was doing. More silence. Then, can I see it? Rose hadn't expected that. Why? Because it's the last thing Dad built. Because I want to understand what he was doing all those years. Because Nate's voice broke again. Because I want to see what love looks like when someone builds it with their hands. Rose closed her eyes. Yes, you can see it, but not yet. I need time there first. Time to make it mine. Time to understand what it means without anyone else's opinions or reactions. Give me a few months. Okay. Nate took a breath. Mom, I know I don't deserve to ask this. But can we still have a relationship? Rose finished for him. Yeah. Rose walked back to the bed and sat down. That depends on you. If you want a relationship with your mother, the door is open. Come visit. Bring your wife and children. Learn about the forest and the species, and what your father spent his life protecting. But if you want a relationship with an heir, you think got cheated, you'll need to hire a lawyer. And Nate, I promise you a lawsuit between a son and his 73-year-old widowed mother is something no judge will look kindly on. You know that better than I do. I don't want a lawyer, I want my mom. Then act like it. Rose heard Nate take a shaky breath. Okay, I will. I promise. We'll see, Rose said. Promises are easy. Following through is harder. She hung up before he could respond. Rose set the phone down and looked at her reflection in the dark window glass. 73 years old. White hair she'd never bothered to dye. Lines around her eyes and mouth from decades of smiling and worrying and holding things together. She looked the same as she had 3 weeks ago, but something fundamental had changed. She wasn't Harrison's widow anymore. Wasn't Nate and Garrett's mother who needed to be taken care of. She was Rose, just Rose, with a forest and a house and a future that belonged entirely to her. The next morning, Rose took the bus back to New York. She had things to handle, the apartment to clear out, paperwork to file, people to notify. She couldn't just disappear into the Virginia forest without tying up the loose ends of her old life. The bus ride felt different this time. Going south, she'd watched the mountains with dread and curiosity mixed together. Coming north, she watched them with something like regret. Like leaving home after just finding it. The apartment was exactly as she'd left it. Stale air. Casserole dishes still in the refrigerator. Growing interesting colonies. The watering can still lying on the terrace where she'd dropped it the day Harrison died. Rose picked up the watering can first, filled it at the kitchen sink, went out to the terrace and watered the dead basil, even though it was clearly beyond saving. Because routines mattered. Because some things you did just to prove you could still do them. Then she started packing. She'd lived in this apartment for 30 years, had accumulated 30 years' worth of things, furniture and dishes and clothes and books, and all the small objects that make up a life. Photo albums and souvenirs and gifts people had given her that she'd kept out of obligation rather than love. She looked at it all and thought about the house in Virginia. About how Harrison had built it with exactly what was needed, and nothing extra. Simple furniture, functional kitchen, space for books and quiet and morning light. Rose started 3 piles. Keep, donate, trash. The keep pile was small. Her clothes. Some books Harrison hadn't already bought for the Virginia Library. The wedding photo album. Her mother's floral tablecloth from Harper's Ferry. The watercolor painting of the town that Harrison had bought when they were dating. The donate pile grew fast. Furniture that wouldn't fit in the Virginia house. Dishes she didn't need. Decorative objects she'd bought because they looked nice, but never actually liked. 30 years of accumulated things that had stopped meaning anything. The trash pile was mostly papers, old bills, receipts, documents that didn't matter anymore. She worked for 3 days straight, sorting, packing, calling donation centers to schedule pickups. It was exhausting and liberating in equal measure. Every box she packed was a piece of her old life she was choosing to leave behind. On the 4th day, Garrett called. Rose almost didn't answer, but she'd said the door was open if her sons wanted a relationship. That meant answering the phone. "Mom," Garrett's voice was careful, controlled. "Nate told me about the Virginia property, about what Dad left you." "I see. I want to apologize. We were wrong about the value, about how we treated you, about all of it." Rose sat down at the kitchen table. "You're apologizing because you found out the land is worth money." "No. I mean, yes, finding out changes things, but that's not why I'm apologizing. Nate told me what you said to him, about how we treated you like a burden, like a problem to solve. And he's right. We did. I did." Garrett paused. "I've been thinking about it a lot the last few days. About how we made all these decisions about your life without asking what you wanted. The apartment, the timeline, everything. We just assumed we knew what was best for you. You assumed I didn't have opinions of my own," Rose said. "Yeah." Garrett's voice was quiet. "I think that's exactly what we did. We've been doing it for years, haven't we? Making decisions for you, talking over you, treating you like you were there to support us but didn't have your own life." "Yes. I'm sorry, Mom. Really sorry. Not because of the money, because we should have been better sons." Rose felt her eyes prickle. "Better late than never, I suppose, yeah? Can I come see you before you move? I'd like to help you pack, or just spend time with you. I know I don't deserve it, but..." "You can come," Rose said. "But Garrett, I need you to understand something. I'm not the same person I was 3 weeks ago. I'm not going to make myself small anymore to make you comfortable. I'm not going to pretend I don't have opinions or preferences. I'm not going to be the quiet, supportive mother who just goes along with whatever you decide." "I don't want you to be that person," Garrett said. "I want to know who you actually are. I realize I never asked." Garrett came the next day. He showed up at the apartment at 9 in the morning with coffee and bagels and an expression Rose had never seen on his face before. Uncertainty mixed with genuine remorse. They spent the day packing together. Garrett carried boxes down to the donation center truck, helped Rose sort through Harrison's remaining things, found old photos in the back of closets, and sat with her looking through them, asking questions about the people and places he'd never bothered to ask about before. At one point, he picked up one of Harrison's forestry textbooks and flipped through it. "Did you know what Dad was doing all those years going to Virginia?" "No," Rose said. "He never told me. I thought it was work, research sites, surveys. He always had a reason, and I never questioned it." "Why not?" Rose thought about that. Because I trusted him. Because he'd never lied to me about anything that mattered. Or so I thought. But also because I was raised in a time when you didn't question your husband. You supported him. You made his life easier. You didn't interrogate his choices. That sounds lonely. It was, sometimes, but it was also what I knew, what my mother did, what all the women I knew did. You made your husband's life work, and you didn't complain about it. Garrett set the book down. Do you wish he'd told you about the house? Rose considered. Part of me wishes I'd known. Wishes I could have been part of it. But another part understands why he kept it secret. He was protecting it, and protecting me. If I'd known, you would have known. And he was right about what you would have done. We would have tried to claim it. Yes. Garrett looked down at his hands. I don't like what that says about us, about who we became. Then change, Rose said simply. You're 45 years old. You have time to become different people. How? Start by asking instead of assuming. Start by listening instead of deciding. Start by remembering that other people, including your mother, have inner lives as complex as yours. They worked in silence for a while after that. But it was a different kind of silence. Not uncomfortable. Just two people doing work together and thinking their own thoughts. Rose made 2 trips to Richmond in the next month. The first trip was to meet attorney Claudia Brennan in person and sign all the paperwork. The lawyer's office was in a restored brick building in the historic district with plants everywhere, and a secretary who made coffee that was actually good. Claudia Brennan was 51, with gray hair cut short, and the kind of competent energy that made you immediately trust her. She laid out all the documents in neat stacks and walked Rose through each one, explaining in plain language what everything meant. Your husband was extraordinarily thorough, Claudia said. I've handled environmental conservation cases for 20 years, and I've never seen documentation this complete. Every question the federal program could ask, he answered 3 different ways with photographic evidence and GPS coordinates and peer-reviewed research citations. He was a professional, Rose said. He was more than that. He was a man who cared deeply about getting this right. Claudia pulled out a manila folder. He came to my office in 2018 with all of this already prepared. Told me he had a degenerative heart condition and didn't know how much time he had. Said he needed to make sure everything was legally bulletproof before he died. Rose felt her throat tighten. He knew he was dying. He suspected. He said his doctor had given him warnings, but he didn't want to slow down because he still had work to finish. Claudia smiled. He talked about you constantly, Mrs. Whitmore. Every meeting we had, he'd mention something about you. A book you'd mentioned wanting to read. An herb you liked to cook with. A comment you'd made about pawpaw fruit 20 years ago that he'd remembered and acted on. He planted pawpaw trees, Rose said. I know. He showed me photos. Was very proud of them. Claudia slid a document across the desk. This is the conservation program application. I'm filing it today. Based on the quality of documentation, I expect approval within 60 days. 60 days. The NYU contract is already active. Dr. Ashford has been waiting for clearance to begin field work. I spoke with her yesterday. She'd like to visit the property next month if you're amenable. I am. And the carbon credit certification is moving through the approval process. That one takes longer, probably 6 months. But the preliminary assessment is solid. You're looking at the full $1.14 million valuation. Rose signed documents for an hour. Her name over and over. Rose Whitmore. Rose Whitmore. Each signature claiming something, asserting ownership, declaring herself. When they finished, Claudia stood and shook Rose's hand. Your husband built you something remarkable, Mrs. Whitmore. Not just the financial structure, the house, the forest, the whole ecosystem of care he created. I've never seen anything like it. Neither have I, Rose said. The second trip to Richmond was to open a bank account. Rose had lived her entire adult life with Harrison managing their finances. She'd had access to their joint account, but had never really paid attention to how money moved, or where it came from, or what happened to it. Harrison handled it, and she trusted him to handle it. But that person was gone. The person who let someone else manage her money, because it was easier than learning to do it herself. Rose walked into the bank and asked to speak with someone about opening an account. The banker was a young woman, maybe 30, who looked at Rose's identification and the documentation from Claudia Brennan, and her eyes went wide. You're setting up to receive annual payments of $82,000. Yes, Rose said. And you have carbon credit assets of over $1 million. Yes. The banker looked at Rose with new respect. We can absolutely help you with that, Mrs. Whitmore. Would you like to speak with our wealth management team? Rose almost laughed. Wealth management. 3 weeks ago, she'd had $530 to her name. Now she needed wealth management. She set up the account, set up automatic payments for property taxes and insurance, set up a budget that felt both generous and strange. $60,000 a year to live on, $22,000 a year to savings. Because even with this much money coming in, Rose couldn't shake the habit of saving, of being prepared, of knowing there was a cushion if something went wrong. When she left the bank, she had a checkbook and a debit card, and online banking credentials, and the surreal feeling of being a woman who controlled her own financial future. She called Emmett from a coffee shop across from the bank. How's the packing going? He asked. Almost done. I'm moving out in 2 weeks. Nate and Garrett have arranged the apartment sale. You doing okay with all that now? Better than I expected. It turns out I don't care as much about the apartment as I thought I would. It was just a place I lived. The forest is home. When are you moving to Virginia? 2 weeks from Saturday. I've rented a small truck. I don't have much to bring. Just clothes and books and a few things that matter. You need help. I was hoping you'd ask. I don't know how to get a truck down that trail. Emmett laughed. You don't. We park at the access point and carry everything in. Same way Harrison did it for 25 years. I'll bring Porter. Between the three of us, we can move whatever you've got in a few trips. Thank you, Emmett. That's what family does, he said. Rose felt something catch in her chest. Family. She'd spent so much of her life thinking family was the people you were born to or married to. But maybe family was also the people who showed up when you needed them, who carried your boxes down a forest trail, who made sure you knew you weren't alone. The last 2 weeks in New York passed in a blur of final tasks. Rose donated most of the furniture, gave the terrace plants to the neighbor who'd always admired them, packed the things she was keeping into boxes that would fit in a rental truck. She walked through the apartment one last time the night before she left. Every room empty now, just bare walls and floors and the echoes of 30 years of living. She stood in the bedroom where she'd slept next to Harrison for 3 decades, where she'd raised 2 sons, where she'd lived the life she thought was her only life. Thank you, she said to the empty room. Thank you for keeping me safe all these years. But I'm ready for something different now. The next morning, Nate and Garrett both came to help her load the truck. They worked together, the 3 of them, carrying boxes down the elevator and arranging them in the truck bed. It was the first time in years Rose could remember doing physical work with her sons. Usually they hired people for things like this, but today they'd come themselves. When the truck was loaded, Nate stood on the sidewalk looking up at the building. I'm sorry about the apartment, Mom. About taking it from you. You didn't take it. Harrison left it to you. It's yours to do with what you want. Still, we could have handled it better. Could have given you more time. Could have asked what you want. But Rose looked at the building, too. 8 floors up. The terrace where she'd watered herbs every Sunday for 20 years. The windows she'd washed every month. I don't need more time, she said. I'm ready to go. Garrett pulled something out of his jacket pocket. An envelope. The boys made you something. For the new house. Rose opened it. Inside was a hand-drawn picture. Crude but earnest. A house in the woods with trees all around it, and a stick figure labeled Grandma on the porch. They want to come visit, Garrett said. When you're ready. They want to see where Grandpa built the house. Bring them in a month, Rose said. Give me time to settle in. Then bring the whole family. I'll show them the forest. She hugged both her sons. Brief, tight hugs that said more than words could. Then she climbed into the truck and started the engine and drove south toward Virginia without looking back. The house looked different when Rose arrived this time. Not physically different. It was the same structure Harrison had built. Same walnut walls and colonial tile roof and windows facing east. But it felt different. Less like a discovery and more like a homecoming. Emmett and Porter were waiting at the trail access point. Porter was exactly as Emmett had described him. 63 years old, weathered face, quiet manner, the look of someone who'd spent his whole life outdoors. Mrs. Whitmore, he said, and shook her hand with a grip that was firm but careful. Your husband was a good man. Best man I ever worked for. I'm glad you're here. Thank you for taking care of the house all these years. It was my honor. They carried Rose's boxes down the trail in shifts. 20 minutes in with arms full of books and clothes and kitchen supplies. 20 minutes back out. 3 trips total, and everything she owned was inside the house Harrison had built. When the last box was carried in, Porter and Emmett stood on the porch with Rose. "You need anything else, you just call," Emmett said. "I'm only 4 hours away. I can be here same day if you need me." "I'll be fine," Rose said. "I have everything I need." "You have my number too," Porter added. "I live 2 kilometers that way through the woods. I come Tuesdays and Thursdays like I have been. Check the systems, maintain the garden, harvest what's ready. But if you need me other times, you just walk over or call." "I will. Thank you both." They left, and Rose stood in the living room surrounded by boxes and felt the silence of the forest settle around her. Not an empty silence, a full silence. Birds calling from different heights, wind moving through leaves, the distant sound of the stream. A silence that was actually the sound of things living and growing and existing, without needing human presence to validate them. Rose opened the first box. Her clothes. She carried them to the bedroom and hung them in the closet next to Harrison's empty hangers. Folded her sweaters into the drawers he'd left empty for her. The second box was books. She shelved them in the living room next to Harrison's forestry texts and field guides. Her novels mixed with his technical manuals. Mary Oliver next to silviculture. Wendell Berry next to forest ecology. The third box was kitchen supplies, herbs and spices from the New York apartment. Her mother's floral tablecloth, which she spread on the table. The good coffee grinder Harrison had never known she wanted because she'd never mentioned it, but had bought for herself 3 years ago, in a small act of independence. By evening, everything was unpacked and the house looked lived in. Looked like it belonged to someone, like it was a home and not just a structure. Rose made dinner from vegetables in the garden. Tomatoes and basil and garlic. Pasta from the pantry supplies Porter had been maintaining. Olive oil and salt, and the simple pleasure of food that tasted like it had been grown in soil that wasn't depleted. She ate on the porch as the sun went down and watched the forest change colors, green to gold to shadow. Listened to the day birds give way to evening birds, give way to the insects and frogs that owned the night. When it was full dark, she went inside and lit the lamps Harrison had installed. LED bulbs powered by the solar panels. Gentle, warm light that didn't disturb the darkness outside. She sat in the chair by the window and opened one of the books from the shelf. A Guide to Native Plants of the Appalachian Highlands. Started reading and found herself completely absorbed. At some point, she looked up and realized 3 hours had passed. 3 hours of reading without interruption, without anyone needing anything, without phone calls or obligations or the background hum of city noise. Just Rose and a book and the quiet of a forest at night. She marked her place and went to bed. The bed Harrison had built and made up for her. Slept on her side of the mattress with the window open, and the forest sounds drifting in. and woke at dawn to sunlight coming straight through the east-facing window into her eyes, exactly as Harrison had planned. The next weeks developed a rhythm. Rose woke with the sun, made coffee with the hand grinder and the French press Harrison had left in the kitchen, sat on the porch in the walnut rocker and watched the forest wake up around her. After coffee, she'd walk the property, learn the trails Porter had maintained, find the spots where different species grew, the ladies' slipper orchids in the northeast section, the bromeliads in the dampest hollows, the Appalachian running cedar that Harrison had rediscovered after it was thought to be locally extinct. She started learning their scientific names: Cypripedium parviflorum for the orchid, Tillandsia for the bromeliads, Diphasiastrum digitatum for the running cedar. Words that felt strange in her mouth at first, but became familiar with repetition. Porter came Tuesdays and Thursdays and taught her things. How to tell when the tomatoes were ripe, which herbs to harvest before they went to seed, how to maintain the solar panels and clear the rainwater collection filters. Your husband learned all this over 25 years, Porter said one afternoon. Don't expect to know it all at once. Just learn a little bit every day. Rose took his advice, learned one new thing each day. The name of a tree, the call of a bird, the way to tell if the stream was running high or low based on the sound it made. In late October, Dr. Vivian Ashford came with 2 graduate students. They arrived on a Tuesday morning, parking at the trail access point and hiking in with backpacks full of equipment. Dr. Ashford was 50-something with gray hair pulled back in a practical ponytail and eyes that lit up when she saw the forest. "Mrs. Whitmore," she said, shaking Rose's hand with genuine warmth. "Harrison talked about you constantly. I feel like I already know you. Please call me Rose." "Rose, these are my students, Elliot Brennan and Adelaide Cross. They'll be doing their dissertation research here." Elliot was 28, serious, with the intensity of someone who'd found their calling. Adelaide was 26, with quick eyes and a notebook she was already filling with observations. "Is it true there's Appalachian running cedar here?" Adelaide asked. "Harrison mentioned it, but we've never seen documented proof." "There is," Rose said, "in the northeast section. Would you like to see it?" Adelaide's face lit up like Rose had offered her gold. They spent the day walking the property, Dr. Ashford and her students cataloging species, taking photographs, marking GPS coordinates. Rose followed and listened and absorbed everything they said. At one point, Adelaide found something in the understory and let out a small sound of delight. "It's blooming. The running cedar is actually blooming. Do you know how rare this is?" Rose didn't, but she was learning. They came back every week after that, set up monitoring equipment, established transects for long-term study, turned the guest bedroom into a field station where they could work when weather was bad. And slowly, gradually, Rose stopped being just the property owner and became part of the research team. Not officially. She had no credentials, but she knew the land, knew where things grew and when they bloomed and how the forest changed with the seasons. Elliot started asking her questions. "Have you noticed if the ladies' slippers bloom earlier after wet springs?" Rose had. She'd been keeping notes. Adelaide wanted to know about the stream flow patterns. Rose had been watching them. Dr. Ashford asked about Harrison's field notebooks. Rose brought them out, and they spent an entire afternoon going through 25 years of observations. "This is extraordinary work," Dr. Ashford said, carefully turning pages. "Some of these observations are things we wouldn't have known to look for. Your husband had an incredible eye for detail." "He was patient," Rose said. "He could sit and watch something for hours without getting bored. That's the best quality a field researcher can have." In late November, Nate called to ask if they could come for Thanksgiving. "All of us," he said. "Me, Vivian, the boys, Garrett and Judith and their kids. We thought maybe we could spend the holiday with you, if you want, if it's not too much." Rose thought about it, thought about the house that barely had furniture, the kitchen that was equipped for one person, the logistics of feeding and housing 8 people in a forest with no grocery stores nearby. "Yes," she said. "Come." They arrived the Wednesday before Thanksgiving. 2 cars parked at the trail access point. 8 people hiking in with overnight bags and food supplies, and the slightly stunned expressions of city people entering wilderness. The boys, Nate's sons at 8 and 6, took one look at the forest and started running. Just pure child joy at space and trees and the permission to be loud. Vivienne stood on the porch looking at the house with an expression Rose couldn't quite read. Not disapproval exactly. More like reassessment. Like she was recalculating something she thought she understood. "Harrison built this?" she asked. "Yes." "By himself?" "Mostly. He had help with some of the heavy work, but the design, the carpentry, the joinery, that was all him." Vivian reached out and touched the walnut wool. "It's beautiful." It was the first genuine thing Rose had heard her say in 15 years. They spent Thanksgiving in the forest. Rose and Judith cooked turkey in the small oven. Garrett and Nate gathered firewood. The children played by the stream under Porter's watchful supervision. They ate on the porch at the table Harrison had built, extending it with boards set across sawhorses to make room for everyone. The food was simple. Turkey and vegetables from the garden and bread from the bakery in Staunton that Porter had driven to get that morning. But it was the best Thanksgiving Rose could remember. After dinner, the adults sat on the porch while the children explored. Nate looked out at the forest and said, "I keep trying to imagine Dad out here every weekend for 25 years, building all this. And I can't picture it." "Why not?" Rose asked. "Because the Dad I knew was quiet, reserved. He went to work and came home and read his books and didn't talk much. I never thought of him as someone who built things with his hands. He built this whole house with his hands." "I know. That's what I can't reconcile. Who was he, the quiet guy reading forestry journals or the man who spent 25 years constructing a secret house in the woods?" "Both," Rose said. "He was both. People are more than one thing." Garrett spoke up. "Did you know when you were married to him, did you know he had this in him?" Rose thought about that. "I knew he was capable, competent. When something broke, he could fix it. When we needed furniture, he could build it. But did I know he could do this? No. I don't think he knew either until he started. What do you think he would say? Nate asked. If he could see us here now, see you living here, see what happened with the will and the forest and everything. Rose looked out at the trees. The sun was setting, casting long shadows through the forest. In the distance, she could hear her grandsons laughing as they discovered something new. I think he'd say it worked out exactly as he planned. That night, after everyone was asleep, Rose sat on the porch alone and thought about the year that had just passed. 11 months since Harrison died. 11 months since that phone call and the watering can hitting the terracotta tile and everything ending, except it hadn't ended. It had transformed, changed shape, become something new. She thought about the woman she'd been in that New York apartment, the woman who'd spent 73 years being what other people needed. Wife, mother, support system. The quiet background presence that made everyone else's life work. That woman was gone, or not gone exactly. Integrated. Part of Rose, but not the whole of Rose. Now there was this. The forest, the house, the books and the research and the mornings watching birds, and the afternoons learning scientific names, and the evenings sitting in silence, listening to the sound of a stream that Harrison once said sounded like Saturday morning. There was the money, $82,000 a year, more than she needed. Enough to live on and save and eventually pass on to grandchildren who might actually appreciate what their grandfather built. There was the independence, the knowledge that she could take care of herself, manage her own finances, make her own decisions, live her own life without asking permission or considering everyone else's needs first. And there was the understanding finally of what Harrison had been doing all those years. He hadn't been hiding something from her. He'd been building something for her. A future where she wouldn't be dependent on sons who saw her as a burden. A future where she would have resources and security and freedom. A future where Rose could be just Rose. The orchid by the north window bloomed on October 15th. Rose had been watching it for weeks, watching the buds form and swell and slowly begin to open. And on the morning of the 15th, she woke and looked out the window. And there it was, in full bloom. Delicate petals the color of old ivory, with a throat marked in burgundy. The most beautiful thing Rose had ever seen. She sat on the bed and looked at it and felt her eyes fill. Not sad tears, not happy tears exactly either. Something more complex. Tears for what was lost and what was found. For Harrison, who'd planted this orchid 28 years ago, and had watched it bloom 23 times before he died. For the 24th bloom that he'd known he wouldn't see, but had wanted Rose to see. Tears for the constancy of it. For something that bloomed every October for 28 years, regardless of who was watching. For faithfulness that didn't need an audience. For beauty that existed whether anyone appreciated it or not. Rose got dressed and went outside and stood under the north window looking up at the orchid. There are things that need no more reason than to continue, Harrison had written in his 2014 field notebook. Rose understood now what he meant. The orchid didn't bloom because anyone planted it, or because someone watered it, or because it had a purpose. It bloomed because that's what it did. Every October, year after year, constant and faithful and beautiful, like love that didn't need to be spoken to be real, like 25 years of work done in silence, like a man who knew exactly what his wife would need after he was gone and spent his entire adult life making sure she would have it. Rose reached up and touched the planter box. The wood was warm from the morning sun, smooth under her fingers, built to last, built with care. "Thank you," she said to Harrison, to the forest, to the orchid, to the morning light. "Thank you for seeing me. Thank you for building this. Thank you for knowing I would need it, even when I didn't know myself." Adelaide arrived that afternoon and found Rose still standing under the north window. "Mrs. Whitmore Rose, are you okay?" "The orchid bloomed," Rose said. Adelaide looked up. "Oh my God, it's beautiful. Can I photograph it?" "Of course." Adelaide pulled out her camera and took dozens of shots from every angle. When she was done, she showed Rose the images on the camera screen. "Do you know what this is?" Adelaide asked. "Dr. Ashford thinks it might be a new species, or at least a regional variant we haven't documented before. She wants to name it." "Name it what?" "Epidendrum whitmori, after your husband, for discovering it and protecting it and documenting it for 28 years. Rose looked at the orchid, at the delicate petals and the burgundy throat, and the morning light making it glow. "Both of us," she said. "What? Name it after both of us. Harrison and Rose. We protected it together." Adelaide smiled. "I'll tell Dr. Ashford." That evening, Rose sat at Harrison's desk in the study and opened his 2014 field notebook to the October entry she'd read before. The North Orchid bloomed again. Blooms every October for 19 years now. Such constancy. Such faithfulness. There are things that need no more reason than to continue. She picked up a pen and turned to a blank page at the back of the notebook, dated it, November 2021, and wrote, "The North Orchid bloomed October 15th. The 24th bloom. Harrison saw 23. I saw this one for both of us. I've been living in the house for 2 months now, learning the forest, learning the species, learning who I am when I'm not being who everyone else needs me to be. The boys came for Thanksgiving. All of them. It was good. Different than before. They see me differently now. Or maybe I see myself differently. And that changes how they see me. I'm 73 years old. I thought my life was ending when Harrison died. But it was beginning. A second life. The life he spent 25 years building for me. I understand now what he was doing. He was giving me time time to read 3,000 books. Time to learn the names of trees and birds and flowers. Time to sit on the porch and drink coffee and watch the forest wake up without anyone needing anything from me. Time to be Rose. Just Rose. She closed the notebook and put it back on the shelf next to all of Harrison's other notebooks. 25 years of observations, and now hers added to the collection. A continuation. A carrying forward. Rose stood and walked to the window. The sun was setting. The forest was turning gold and shadow. She could hear the stream in the distance, could smell the autumn earth and the pine resin, and the specific scent of this place that had become home. She was 73 years old, maybe had 10 years left, maybe 20 if she was lucky. However long it was hers, not time borrowed, not time spent in service to someone else's life. Her time, her second life, the life Harrison built, the life Rose was learning to live. She touched her wedding ring. 52 years she'd worn it. Through marriage and motherhood and widowhood and everything after. She thought about taking it off sometimes. Thought that's what widows did. Removed the symbol of what was lost. But she wasn't going to, because the ring wasn't just about Harrison. It was about her too. About the woman who married at 22 and raised children and kept a home and did all the invisible work that held a family together. That woman deserved to be remembered, deserved to be honored, just like this new woman deserved to be celebrated. The woman who walked forest trails and learned scientific names and managed her own money and lived in a house built by love over 9,000 days. Both women were Rose. Both women mattered. Rose looked out at the forest one more time, then turned and walked to the kitchen to make dinner. Tomorrow, Porter was coming, and they were going to work on the winter garden preparation. After that, Adelaide and Elliot were stopping by to show her the preliminary data from their orchid study. And the day after that, Rose was planning to drive to Richmond to meet with Claudia about the carbon credit certification, which had been approved and was ready for final signing. And the day after that, she was going to sit on the porch and read and do absolutely nothing because she could. Because she had time. Because at 73 years old, standing in a kitchen, in a house, in a forest that was completely and entirely hers, Rose Whitmore understood something fundamental and true. It's never too late to bloom.